All right, so this is video number 3. If you've been following along, we are making a cell phone case or just an extra pocket if you need one. These can be used if you pin them or stitch them inside the waistband of your clothing. These can be used for hidden pockets to go to a party or a concert, just to keep cards or money, anything in that you don't want anybody to know that you have on you. You can put this inside your clothing and it works wonderfully. Now this one actually does have a belt loop, so you can wear it outside as well, just hanging from your belt for your cell phone, so that it's not in your back pocket where you're going to sit on it and possibly cause you to break your phone. I've done that. You just end up breaking the screen on your phone. That's never fun. Been there, done that. So if you followed videos 1 and 2, you now have a length of crocheted material. If you want to count rows, each of these stripes is 2 rows, so you can count your rows that way. You don't have to count your rows for this project. It's not as important as simply making sure that whatever you are making your case for actually fits down inside the case. My cell phone measures about 3.5 to 4 inches. Whoops, I got my crochet hook stuck. There we go. So I'm actually making this case about 4 inches deep. So you'll just stick a ruler in there, or you can actually use the item, whatever you're making it for, and make sure that the edges are going to close around it. And okay, this one has the extra length on it for my belt loop. So you'll want to measure how wide your belt is and have that much extra. My belts typically measure about 2.5 inches wide, so I measure from the edge of the pocket to the edge of the material, and that gives me the extra that I need for my belt to fit inside the loop, so that I can wear it on my hip. And we just make sure the top edge is lined up with the line across, just to make sure, just to keep everything lined up. And let's get started with the finishing steps. So I'm going to insert my hook into my working loop. I should have pulled that out big and I didn't, but there we go. Insert the hook. Now I turn around so that I'm working on the back edge. You don't have to. This is personal preference. There are actually 3 or 4 different ways you can finish this. You could cut your yarn and put a needle, use a big tapestry needle, and just whip stitch around and around on each row to hold everything together. All you're doing is closing the side edge of your pouch. What I'm going to do on this one is a slip stitch finish. I'm going to make a slip stitch turning chain on the end of the row that I just worked. So that's the end of the worked row. And on the edges, you'll notice you have hills and valleys. The hills are the turning chain rows where you turned around and went back the other direction, and the valleys are where you came back up, so that the turning chain is on the next row. So you want to line those hills and valleys up on the edge so that they match up. You can use a safety pin. I typically don't worry about it too much. I can keep them just visually lined up without too much trouble. And what you'll want to do is simply pick up both edges. You'll just pick that up right there and then pick up the front edge just like that. And those are both the turning chains. Yarn over and pull it through, and you can now make your single crochet. Alright, so there's your single crochet finish. You'll just do that in each row all the way down. You catch a valley, and then you'll catch your turning chain hill, and then you'll catch the valley on the next one. There we go. And just like that, and you continue down to the bottom edge. For another way to finish it, and this one will actually create a design on your project. Same idea, you simply catch the turning chains of your row, yarn over and pull it through, but to make a slip stitch or a chain stitch, instead of yarn over to pull through those 2 loops, you simply pull up, and that is a slip stitch. Now you catch the valley on the next row and pull through and slip it through, slip stitch there. And on the turning chain hill, catch and slip stitch. The one problem you may see with this is if you pull your loop too tight on your hook, you may end up with kind of a scrunched up look because your chains will be too tight. It's not that big of a problem, but you want to kind of keep your loops big enough to span the row that you're working on. If you don't, it can end up kind of lumpy looking, and it's just not, I'm not a big fan of the look of the tight slip stitch. So you'll want to kind of pull your loop up just a little bit so that it's big enough to cover the row of your stitch. You don't want these to be too tight. And that is how to close an edge. Now I'm going to pause for just a second and work all the way down to the bottom. You can see it's kind of making a chained pattern on the edge of the row, on the edge of the pocket. This is what I meant by it will make a pattern in your work. I like this stitch as a close. It works really well. I also use the single crochet quite a bit. In fact, this one that I made yesterday actually is closed with the single crochet across the edge. And either way works just fine. The whip stitch works just as well. All you're doing is closing up the edges of your pocket. So I will be right back. All right, I'm back. I have worked all the way along the edge. So now that entire edge is closed. It makes, whoops, sorry about that. It does make a full closed edge, a very tight. You could put dimes in here and they're not going to fall out. It makes a very smooth edge. Alrighty there. So now I'm down at the corner. I am going to make a stitch in the last stitch and one on the outside. This is basically a turning chain. Just slip through, and now you want to check and make sure that you're working on a straight line all the way across and that you don't have it rolled too far so that your stitches are going to skip a line. That's the good thing about working with the single crochet and with any of the crochet stitches. Really, you're going to end up with lines somewhere in your project that you can use to keep yourself working straight across. The other thing you might check is that you're still lined up across the top of your pouch with the line that you started with, because it can get out of skew too and cause just, it doesn't really make a difference, but it will be unsightly. It can make it slightly hard to use because you do need to be able to get your fingers inside the pouch. Okay, so we have a straight line here and we're still lined up across the top. So all I'm going to do, I have that turning chain that I just made. I'm going to go into the next stitch, and I'm only catching one stitch there. I'm not going all the way through the back and catching the whole row. I'm only catching the top of the stitch. And just pull through. Make sure your loop stays big enough so it doesn't pull your corner into a pucker. And just simply yarn over and through, and that's all there is to it. I've had friends of mine tell me that crochet is too hard, too difficult, to whatever reason. They just don't seem interested. They just don't want to learn. It's not as hard as people make it out to seem. It's simply pulling a loop of yarn through another loop of yarn. You can do this with any type of string. I've done it with rope. If you want to make like a basket or something big, the larger your yarn is, the larger your project will be. You can do this with just your fingers. You don't necessarily have to have a hook. It makes it just so useful to use. And here I am at the corner again. Now I'm on the other side. I'm going to check once again that my top edge is still lined up. All right, we're still lined up there. So I'm going to turn back to my corner and make sure that my hills and valleys, my turning chains, and the following rows are all lined up. And continue up the side. I make a turning chain so I can turn the corner and catch the turning chain row on both edges of the material. Whoops, I almost did a single crochet there instead of the slip. And you can do that if you like the way it looks. You can certainly switch and do single crochets on one side. It's up to you. That's the other good thing about crochet, is you are doing it to match what you want. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfection is overrated. And you can just make it, if you're happy with it, then you are perfectly good to go. So I'm going to pause the video again and work all the way up this edge until I get to the edge of my into the edge of my pocket. All right, I've worked the entire edge. I'm up to the edge of my pocket now. You can see my working yarn is on the edge of the pocket. Now for the belt loop, I'm going to continue that slip stitch all the way to the very corner of my pocket, and this just puts the yarn up on the corner of the belt loop, and it actually reinforces the edge so that my belt doesn't misshape it and cause it to come out of position. So I just one slip stitch in each row up the edge, and this is just a reinforcement. You could break your yarn and just go to the edge. It's either way again. And then this is your beginning chain. You can see how it's got kind of a little braided look to it, just a twisted braid look to it. You're going to go right in that very corner stitch there. And one slip in there. And then we're going to fold it down to make the belt loop. And again, you'll see that it lines up. It kind of naturally does it. The top edge will line up on one line, and the bottom edge will end up lining up somewhere along the back side of your pouch. And so I put my fingers inside the pouch so that I don't stitch it together. If you go all the way through the pouch, then you end up with a string inside your pouch and you won't be able to open it all the way. So you do want to make sure that you're only catching the back side of your pouch when you make your belt loop. If you're not making a belt loop, if you stopped at the top corner, that is perfectly fine. You don't necessarily need the belt loop if you're going to be using this as a hidden pocket. So what I'm going to do is figure out which line it lines up with. Okay, it wants to go with this line right here. So I'm going to take my hook. You know what, I'm going to make a turning stitch right here just so that I have a little bit of extra play with my hook. And I'm going to catch the slip stitch in the edge of the work right there. And yarn over. This can be a little tricky because you're actually working backwards now. So you'll pull it through and slip it right on through the loop that was already on your hook. And like I said, you're working backwards, so it can be just a little bit of a trick to get your hook in there. But that connects your belt loop to the edge of your work. And then now it'll get just a hair bit easier because you simply insert your hook under the next stitch in your work so that you lift that up and then into the beginning chain that you started with, you can see where the stitch for the first row is. You simply insert your hook at the base of that first stitch, yarn over and pull it through and through the loop, your working loop, and then you go to the next stitch and insert your hook, and in the next stitch of your chain, and continue across just like that, just going to the next stitch. Again, you want to make sure your tension is good. You don't want to have your tension too snug to reach across the stitch. You want to make sure that loop stays big enough to span the stitch. And you'll go to the next stitch, yarn over and pull that all the way through. And on this, I'm not holding tension on my yarn. The yarn is just loose. There's really no way for me to hold it. I'm simply hooking it and pulling it through using my thumb. You can snug it up if you have to by just getting a hold of it with your thumb, kind of wrap it around and pull it snug. In this instance, it's not a huge thing. Again, it's just personal preference. And you simply pull it through and through. That's all it takes. And there we go. And through that one. And next stitch. There we go. And as you practice, as you get better with this, it will get faster. It's just a matter of practice. As I said, I believe in the last video, crochet is a time-consuming hobby. It can take up a lot of time. Whoops. Okay, I dropped that one. It hooked, and when I went to unhook it, it hooked on the stitch. And when I went to unhook it, it just rolled right out. It's not a big deal. Don't get frustrated with yourself over it. It happens. Even those of us that have crocheted for a long time sometimes drop a stitch out like that. You simply pick up the loop and continue on from that loop. It's not something to get upset over. It happens. And you simply just keep on going. And okay, so this is the final stitch. I'm on the very edge of my work now. I'm going to pick up that last stitch there and through the last chain. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So that was actually the last stitch in the row. Whoops. There we go. That was the last stitch in the row. So you're going to go through the outside edge now, the slip stitch that you made on the outside edge. You just lift those two sides of the loop up and through. Okay, now since I did the chain on the other edge, I'm going to go ahead and come up this side to make the same finished edge on this side. You don't necessarily have to do this. You could simply make a chain. That's your end knot, and you cut your yarn right here and pull it back through to hide it. Just put your hook, just work your hook in and out of the loops wherever looks good to you, and pull that tail back into, whoops, sorry.